In this video, we're going to look at numeric bindings. So we've already talked about how you can do bindings with properties. We want to focus specifically on numeric bindings and what you can do with them, because they actually have some nice features where you can do arithmetic on the bindings and get kind of updated bindings from them. So I've copied over our little template to a file called Numeric Bindings. What I want to do here, I'm going to add a label. Let's see, we'll add a button, we'll add a slider. Let's go ahead and add a scroll bar for good measure as well. Okay, actually, let's go ahead and add a text field as well. Okay, so I want to, we'll put the label, we'll just go ahead and create these. Val label equals new label. And the idea of this label is that it is going to stay centered in the window. Okay? So that no matter how you change the window, it's going to stay centered, at least horizontally. We could put in a vertical, but there's not too much point in doing both. It's about the same. I want to have a button, and the idea of the button is just that the button is going to move around and it's going to be controlled. It's going to move from side to side across the scene based upon the position of the slider. And once again, sliders, we give it a minimum value, so a 0. We'll give it a maximum value, 500 seems about right, and we'll give it an initial value. It'll start off at 0. And I'm going to tie the scroll bar to the slider and therefore to the button that's moving around. New scroll bar, and when we create a new scroll bar, we actually don't give it anything. We're going to set the min and max separately. Scroll bar dot min equals 0. Scroll bar dot max equals 500, so it matches with our slider. And then I'll make a text field we will field.text equals label.text.value. It's a property, so I'm going to get the value out of it. Could have called apply, but either one will work to get the what's stored inside of it out. And then I'm going to put it somewhere, so field.layoutX equals, I think I want to put this text field kind of on the right side of the window. So I don't know, 500 is actually probably a reasonable place to put that, and I'll leave it right at the top. For the slider, I'm going to let the slider stay on the at the top and in the top left. For the button, let's go ahead and change the layout Y so that it's down at 100 pixels. And for the scroll bar, I will make it so it's down around the bottom of the window. Scroll bar dot layout Y equals, and at least initially the bottom of the window would be about 270 for the top corner, so it goes down and touches roughly the 300. Okay, let's go ahead and add those things to the contents. Content equals list of label, button, slider, scroll bar, and field. And we can run that, ScalaFX of numeric bindings, and see if I did that okay. Nope, seems to be running. Now, of course, these things don't do anything. Our label, actually I should change the Y of our label. I'll move the label down not to 100, but how about 50? Okay, so that sets up the GUI. Now I want to use bindings to do things that are more interesting. So for example, on the label, I want to make it so that it's, well, first we'll start with ones that kind of seem a little bit easier. Button dot layout X. We're going to bind that. Once again, it's the less than and equal. So it's kind of pointing in towards that value, which should start with a lowercase l. And I want to bind that to the slider's value. Okay. I said I also want to make it so the scroll bar has the same value as the slider. So as you adjust the scroll bar, or as you adjust the slider, the scroll bar changes, and when you adjust the scroll bar, the slider changes. So scroll bar dot value, and we're going to use a bidirectional binding here. Unfortunately, VI colors that in a little bit interesting way. Slider dot value. Let's see if I got that correct. So if I did, when I move this, you should see the button move across from 0 to 500. Also note that as I'm moving it, this was moving, and we could click down here. So all of these are tied together and they're automatically updating with one another. That's one of the very nice things about the bindings. Now, the more interesting part is when we start doing some math with this. These are just fairly simple bindings. I want to make it so that the label stays centered no matter what I do to the window. Label dot layout X. Okay, so where should that go? Well, the center of the window would be the width of the window, which we could get with scene.width divided by 2, right? But I also need to subtract off the width of the label. So it would be half of the width of the scene minus half of the width of the label. So I can do label dot width, and then take those two things and divide by 2. Okay. It's not a member of, whoops, I have left off the capital X there for the layout. Okay. Yes, so there are some potential challenges that happen with some of these bindings as far as setting things up initially, and so you can get some interesting error messages. But you'll notice now when I move this, nothing else in here is moving around but that one label. It might actually be nice to force the text field to stay on the right edge and the scroll bar to stay at the bottom. If I do this, well, we could go ahead and do that. We could set the, and the thing that's, okay, actually I'll do one other thing first. I want to take the labels text and bind it to the fields text. Now what does that mean? That means that as I go in and type, it goes into the label and the label automatically adjusts, and that's significant because binding here, it makes it clear this binding has two different properties in it. We have the scene width binding, so when I do this, the scene width is changing, but as I type up in that text field, the label's width is changing. Either one that I change alters the position so that the whole thing stays centered. Okay? And that's one of the really cool things about these numeric bindings. Actually, it works for all the bindings, but the fact that I can set up formulas and every property that appears in here is going to be used to automatically update things. So when any of the properties in the formula change, you will have that change reflected. If I want to make it so that the scroll bar is at the bottom, we could say scroll bar layout Y is bound to scene.height minus scroll bar.height. If we do that, we actually don't need to set the layout Y up there. And similarly, if I want the field to stay off on the side, we'll take its layout X, and instead of hard coding it to 500, we will set it to be the scene.width minus field's width. And if we try running that, now we get 3 of these warnings because of how we're positioning things. But you'll note that as I change that, the text field stays over there. As I change this, the scroll bar stays, and our button still moves around as it goes. So that's a nice overview of the numeric bindings and some of the fun things that we